Everybody knows about the 38 CFR and its relationship to mental health, but there are a few essential aspects of a mental health rating that's within the M21. I'm going to share a couple of things that I wish I knew about mental health when I was doing my claim. Let's get into it.
Whiskey 9 Yankee 7 November Golf, over.
It is true that everyone gets one mental health rating no matter what symptoms they exhibit when it comes to mental health. Now, there are going to be some very, very small things, small nuances between mental health disorders, such as mental health and eating disorders, which are technically mental health disorders. But by and large, you are going to be looking at one rating. So what is the M21? Essentially, the M21 is just a guide for adjudicators to make their decision on your service connection and essentially your rating later down the road. Essentially, CMP examiners don't even know that the M21 exists. The 38 CFR outlines how you're going to be rated, but the M21 outlines the ability for the decision to be made that will basically give the holistic picture for your whole service connection, and then later on the rating associated with that connection. So when we're looking at the M21, you have to understand that no matter what condition that you're going for, whether that be depression, anxiety, PTSD, they will all be read as the same mental health disorder, at least according to the M21. And they will be looking at a couple of different aspects: the description of the claim, the symptoms that the claimant describes, the information and evidence that the claimant submits, and any other information and evidence obtained. From our previous videos, you understand that every initial claim needs all of the big three: service connection, current diagnosis, and that nexus. For mental health claims, there isn't any in-service evidence that is needed in the traditional sense. What they tend to look at are evidence other than medical. And essentially, this is just understanding specific situations or the event that caused your specific condition. This could be articulated in a personal statement. This could be articulated in buddy statements or lay statements. And maybe you had a particular event that was recorded in your actual records, your service records, saying that you maybe had a sexual assault or you had any other combat-related event that you can highlight in those specific statements. At a minimum, you're going to need evidence that is under other than medical in order to show the in-service portion of the big three. These same events that you bring up in those statements or buddy statements or lay statements will also be articulated again during your CMP exam, and then again during your DBQ portion of that CMP exam. So just be prepared mentally and physically to regurgitate the same story and the same events and the same triggers over and over again. This is going to be important because they're going to try to compare all of these different statements in order to give a holistic picture of that event. Listen, guys, this is the time to be vulnerable. Be clear, be concise, and be very pointed as to what you're feeling in that moment as you're explaining the specific event that caused that mental health condition. All right, so moving on into that current diagnosis, we understand that the current diagnosis can be developed in many, many different ways. In service, there have been many examples of in-service diagnosis. There have been many examples of VA healthcare diagnosis, independent medical opinions, or psychiatrist diagnosis, therapist, etc. I'll give you kind of an example for mine. A lot of my mental health diagnosis was identified when I went to get my ADHD evaluated by the VA healthcare, and that led to PTSD and other mental health portions that then helped me develop my claim. We all know that the CMP exam can do the same things. From what we have seen more often is you will sit down with a psychologist. They will then ask you questions off of the DBQ, the Disability Benefits Questionnaire, and then that will give them a baseline for your diagnosis and your service connection, which we are going to go in detail in this video about the DBQ and what to expect when participating in a CMP exam or any independent medical opinion questionnaire that may come up. So the biggest advice that we here at the CIVDIV would like to give is don't wait till just the CMP exam in order to get your medical evidence. Try your best to develop your medical evidence even before you get to the CMP exam. Now, we're not advocating for IMO, as you will have to pay for that specifically. But if you can go through your VA healthcare in order to at least seek help, get on a service treatment plan, and then that service treatment plan can help have that diagnosis linked to it, I would go down that route before you actually go and pay a lot of money for an overall evaluation. But again, that is just our opinion. You can do what you want, and it is your money to spend. So what questions do they ask on a DBQ, and what's really associated with the whole process? Well, let's go ahead and get into that. The first section aims to get a general diagnosis. Basically, what does the veteran think they have? The second part is to differentiate symptoms from the symptoms described. Does it encompass multiple mental health conditions? The next one is to understand the occupational and social impairment. How does it affect one's ability to work? And how does it affect one's personal life? I do believe out of the first section, this is the most essential portion. As I told you in previous videos, the VA really looks at the diminished ability to work and the emotional impairment of the health of the vet. So this portion is where you really need to be very detailed and very, very pointed as to the symptoms that are going to be associated with your 50% rating that we're going to highlight a little bit later. The second section of the DBQ aims to look at clinical findings of evidence you provide, and they go down the veteran's history. They look at it in three realms. One, pre-military, in the military, and then post-military. Essentially, what the VA is looking at is, did in fact your mental health condition happen during your military service? So they're going to ask you about pre-military trauma, whether that be at home, school, whatever. They're going to ask you about military trauma, and they're going to ask you about post-military trauma. Depending on your answers can really paint a picture that either you developed it in service or out of service. Some of the questions that they're going to ask you are going to be in reference to relevant social, marital, family history, relevant occupational and educational history, relevant military or mental history, relevant legal and behavioral history, and a relevant substance abuse history. I'm telling you guys, be very, very clear on everything that they ask you in this portion. This is going to paint the true picture of whether or not your mental health condition was cultivated or developed in the military. Section 3 is pretty straightforward. It's really just asking the person who's filling out the DBQ, based on the information that the vet is giving you, what is the most likely condition that they have with all of the questions and all of the things that they have collected at this point. It is not really an ironclad portion or diagnosis, but it does give the examiners a good idea on how they're going to go forward with your rating. Section 4 is all about the observation of whoever is doing the exam. So just so you know, every examiner is reading your body language, especially when we're talking about mental health. Now, I know a lot of the mental health exams are happening via telehealth now, but just remember, they're still looking at your ability to be dodgy. Can you pay attention? Do you have short-term memory loss? So if they ask you a series of questions and ask you to repeat them back to them, were you able to do that, etc.? All of these things are going to be those observations that they're going to be highlighting in this section. I'm not telling you to fake it, not telling you to do anything like that. What I am telling you is make sure that you understand that you are being observed outside of just the questions being asked. So I'm going to combine 5 and 6, 5 being any other relevant conditions or symptoms being observed. This can be a plethora of things that they can articulate during this section. But then last but not least, section 6, as far as the evaluation of the vet is concerned, is the vet competent? Are you able to articulate your points in an understanding manner? Are you able to really identify specific times, places, etc.? All of this will be rated for your competency. Now, all of that is really developed to do one thing, and that is to grant service connection. What they actually use to grant the rating is from the 38 CFR. And let's go ahead and take a look at what 50% is for mental health. Now remember, this is a combination of all of your mental health symptoms, and it's not necessarily divided by one or two of them. Although, if you exhibit mostly anxiety, it would be, say, a specified anxiety disorder. If you are mostly identified with PTSD, it will be labeled as PTSD. Or if you exhibit a small amount of a lot of different one, it could be unspecified depression disorder. So just understand you're still going to get that one rating, but this is what it's going to be under. So here is 50%. So the one thing that I want you to take away from this one is going to be the social impairment and the occupational impairment, which is the same for 70. But one thing to really notice are, one, the flatten effect, the panic attacks, the short and long-term memory loss, and the impaired judgment. From what we have seen, these seem to be the biggest ones when it comes to evaluating this portion, or for this rating rather. A lot of vets who end up not getting 50% is because they don't articulate the specific symptoms, such as the flatten effect, the inability to remember specific tasks given to them from their short-term or long-term memory. These are going to be very, very important because they are pointed towards the diminished ability to work. Everything should be pointed towards the diminished ability to work and the diminished ability to have social interaction with family, friends, or anything to do with your personal life. So really, the biggest difference between 30 and 50% is the diminished ability to work and the frequency of the symptoms. 30 and 50 are very, very close. Just the frequency of the symptoms is really what puts you over into the 50%. So really understanding how often you suffer from those specific symptom effects and how much it really degrades your ability to work. So going off the 38 CFR, look at how your symptoms and frequencies match up to 50% and make sure you articulate and be very concise about how each of the aspects of that 50% is meeting the criteria for what you live with on a day-to-day basis. Really be forthcoming about your feelings and how it affects you on a day-to-day basis. This is the only way to ensure that they understand what is going on with you. All right, so now that you know what's in the DBQ, you are better armed to know how to frame your answers to that DBQ from a medical professional. Sometimes we find that when vets get put on the spot and aren't really prepared or understand the questions that are going to be asked, they aren't as effective as they normally would be if they were prepared to consolidate their thoughts. With that, we hope that understanding the DBQ will allow you to be able to be poised. So when you go in for your CMP exam or when you go in for that IMO from a medical professional that's going to do a DBQ on you, you know what to expect. All right, that's all I have for you. And as always, this is Jay with the CIVDIV. Stay informed, stay resilient, and I'll catch you later.